As a kid growing up, I knew that famous African American and also white figures had both lived in Brookland. So it gave me a lot of neighborhood pride, but it also emphasized the richness of the integrated neighborhood that I was growing up in.
My memories of Brookland in the 60s, at the time that the freeway was destined to go through it, was that it was very similar to where I was from, which was Tacoma Park, which meant that it was very neighborhood oriented, kind of small scale housing, variety in the kinds of people that lived there, you know, not a typical upper Northwest neighborhood, more working class people there, more racially mixed.
You know, my parents worked a lot. My mother was a nurse before she taught at Catholic U, and my father worked in Beltsville, so they came home, and for them to go out to a meeting and us to have a babysitter was really something. And so probably for about a year, every week, we had a babysitter, and it was one of the older Neville girls from up the alley. And they would come back and be talking about this idea that there could be a big highway about a block and a half from where we lived that would be elevated, and that the row houses on 10th Street and the apartments in Turkey Thicket would, part of that would be gone, and there'd be a highway there.
After the fateful dinner where my mother broke the news that a freeway was going to destroy our neighborhood and Tacoma Park, the first thing my father did was to try to figure out how to get an organization together to fight this thing. You know, immediately he had the idea for forming an organization called Emergency Committee on the Transportation Crisis. And I think this ECTC is such a catchy kind of, you know, name. I'm sure that guided this sort of wordy title for this group. One thing I think that's really important about my father's ability to organize was his creativity. So the fact that he was a trained artist, I think oftentimes artists have the ability to kind of conceptualize something in a complete way. So when people talk about him being an angry guy, he definitely was, but he also used that as just one part of a whole action that he would conceptualize. So the anger had its place when he'd show up, you know, to break into help people break back into their houses, or when he'd stand on a chair at a city council meeting, you know, and yell. Well, when my father saw the map of the freeway, you know, when he finally could get his hands on what was planned for the North Central Freeway, he really quickly realized that this road was going to go through neighborhoods that were working class, in the case of Tacoma Park and Brookland, and African American, you know, and it was very clear that there was a kind of not only disregard, but a willingness to just throw away those communities. Reggie Booker was articulate and, you know, just a really good organizer himself, and a great spokesman for the organization. So he and my father, after, you know, looking at the plans for the freeway and seeing where it was going through Brookland, down 13th Street, had this idea that, yeah, this was a white man's road through black man's homes, and that was their slogan. I think the freeway fight really ended more with a whimper than a bang. There wasn't any one day where it was like, oh, we're never gonna have to fight another inch of freeway, you know, it's over. The Three Sisters Bridge fight lingered on, and that was finally killed by Judge Sirica, who in his decision said that these freeways were not paying enough attention also to how the citizens of the district felt about them, which I think showed the importance of these constant protests that my dad had organized.
The people around where we lived, when there was this idea that an elevated highway was going to come through, they're not the people that are hiring lawyers. And the same thing is true for today when somebody wants to come in and buy a block of real estate next to the house you've lived in for 40 years. It really feels like you're being pushed out.